where people can post information. It's located here and it's currently open. The ATAG members are expected to further engage in this forum and try to crowdsource information in the future, but right now we've just set it up so that it's there for when people want to use it, and it's open to anyone who wants to post something. And then the ATAG will be providing guidance on disaggregations. This would include by gender. And then as we move forward, the next task would be, how do we really support country level implementation of these indicators and ensure that policy is based on data? So then I wanted to quickly, because I've talked about the binary indicators, and I think people have a hard time maybe understand what we're talking about. If you look in the decision, this is called global level indicators from binary responses. This is the term that's used in decision 15.5. And so what that looks like is it kind of looks like a list of indicators that say something like number of countries that have, for target 22, it's number of countries that have decision making that is participatory, inclusive, representative, and gender responsive, for example. So how do we then measure the number of countries that have that? Well, we're proposing, the ATAG is proposing, or will be proposing, and you can see their work online, questions, a series of questions. So it wouldn't just be a single question, but it would be, you know, does your country have a policy for ensuring participatory, inclusive, and gender responsive decision-making for PLCs? And then they would ask the question again for women, ask the question again for people with disabilities, so that it would be possible to use the information from the national report to understand which countries are covering which groups. And then in those responses, it also won't just be exactly a yes, no, it'll be a yes fully, a yes partially, there, you know, yes, there's some gaps, a no, but it's planned, or a no. And so we would have sort of variations of yes or no that would allow us to have a lot more detailed information, but it would still allow us to compute this global level indicator, because in the global level indicator, you would have to have all of those things. It would have to be an and. You have to have this and the other in order to have met what's in the target. And so this is what the ATAG is going to, or what they're currently thinking, and what's going to be in the report from that ATAG, which should go online soon. So I'll just leave it at that. I think as you're trying to identify entry points, I think that this, you know, thinking about what questions go into the national reports is really a strong entry point, and making sure that we're actually asking the right questions and getting information from those reports that allows us to understand decision making is really key as we move forward. So I will leave it at that and hand back over to you, Amelia.
Thanks so much indeed, Lillian, for giving us these critical elements to understand what is the monitoring framework and in which stage of the process we are in. Now I will invite Matea Bukelic from WCMC to share her valuable insights and let us know how gender responsive the monitoring framework could be, or which are our opportunities. Please welcome, Matea.
Thank you, Lillian. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Okay, I'll share my screen. Okay, does that work? You can see it? Okay, great. Thank you again so much for the invite. And I think this presentation will complement what Gillian just said. Just a bit about me. So I'm a policy officer within UNEP WCMC, within the Nature Indicators group. So as Gillian said, so monitoring framework is to be used by parties in all different stages. So in the implementation of the goals and targets, it can be used for planning, monitoring, national reporting, and the progress of implementation. And this is the link to the actual monitoring framework. I will just skip over the slide just quickly because Gillian over mentioned it, most of it. But just to say again, the monitoring framework, as we heard, has headline indicators, which can be complemented by component complementary indicators, but we also have these global scale indicators or binary indicators, which will be compiled from binary yes or no responses from the national reports. I also want to say that the decision on mechanisms for planning, reporting, and review requests that all parties use headline indicators, but also provide responses on binary yes or no questions, as is set in the monitoring framework in their national reports, and supplement this by additional component complementary or national level indicators. So as we heard, the monitoring framework is not yet complete. So the 26 adopted headline indicators are a different level of readiness. So UNFWCMC was compiling metadata on these headline indicators. And according to our assessment, the 12 indicators are available now, 14 need further development. And then we have 7 targets that were adopted, which we don't have an adopted headline indicator. Headline indicators can also be used multiple times to ease the reporting burden on the countries. And the countries can also use their own national indicators in addition to all of these adopted indicators. So as Gillian said, there's still some further work required to finalize the framework indicators that are not ready for use. For this, the parties adopted a mechanism, as we heard, and they agreed to establish the ad hoc technical expert group on indicators. So one of the actions for the ATEC is to address these critical gaps to improve the monitoring framework, and particularly headline indicators that do not have an existing methodology, and advise on their implementation on a national level. But also keep the list of these binary indicators we just heard on review, and advise on the wording of questions to construct these binary indicators. I'll just put, so this is a screenshot just so we can have it in front of ourselves what we're talking about. So this is target 23 as it currently is now in the monitoring framework. And just to mention, which I think it's quite important, that also the gender equality, gender responsive implementation is not only mentioned in the monitoring framework, it's mentioned in the decision on 15/4 on the Global Biodiversity Framework in the section C, where it says that successful implementation of the framework will also depend on ensuring gender equality, empowerment of women and girls, and reducing inequalities. In addition to this, we also have another reference in the decision on approaches to planning, monitoring, reporting, and review, which encourages parties to adopt the gender plan and action, all aspects and all scales of planning, implementation, reporting, and review, which are related to the Global Biodiversity Framework. To go back to the monitoring framework, so we see here target 22, which is the gender equality target, and we have see there is no adopted headline indicator. What we do have is a binary indicator, and you will see that by the little b by the number 23, which means we have a binary indicator proposed for this target. And as Gillian said, this is currently being discussed in the ad hoc technical group on indicators. So current wording of this binary indicator is a number of countries where their legal framework, including customary law, guarantees women's equal rights to land ownership and or control. So we see that this target, the target is very complex. It's very ambitious. So it could be challenging to address all these elements within the simple yes or no answer. So also, I wanted to show while we're on this page, we also have a component indicator which says indicator national implementation of the gender plan of action, but currently it does not have a methodology, which can be another opportunity worth exploring to improve on this indicator. So as I said, to monitor target 23, we can consider developing an approved version of this binary indicator that is comprehensive, that will address the adopted gender plan of action with questions that will show progress on actions countries are implementing, which also relates to different elements of the target 23, but also target 22. And those questions that we just heard could be categorical. So we could have multiple questions that will address different elements within the target. So not just simply yes or no question, and that is it. So this is currently being discussed in the ACTEC. What I want to highlight here is the adopted gender plan of action. And why is it important? Because the gender plan of action will also support on gender responsibility responsive approach to applying the implementation mechanisms associated with the monitoring framework. It also includes 3 outcomes, which are grouped under objectives and actions with proposed deliverables and timelines. And the implementation of these actions from the gender plan of action will not only ensure the gender responsive implementation of the framework, but will also drive progress towards meeting the target 22 as we see now and 23. So because the gender plan of action also addresses various components from these targets. Just as a last slide, I just wanted to highlight these are some of the resources. So as we mentioned, the monitoring framework, the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also the adopted gender plan of action. And the last link is what I mentioned, that UNWCMC has been collating metadata on the adopted headline indicators. So you can see on this website for all headline indicators, are they available? If they're not, is there a national methodology? Are there any gaps? What are the plans for the updates? So it's a really useful resource to look as well. Okay, I think I've used my 5 minutes quickly, but thank you so much. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Matea. I think that with your insights, now we have a more comprehensive view about what is the work in front of us and the diverse perspectives, but also the diverse options that we can build on. And thank you so much also for highlighting the importance of the gender plan of action and the role that it can play supporting these discussions. Now, please, dear audience, we are going to move now into the next segment of this webinar, where our experts are going to share with us dedicated analysis that they have prepared towards a set of targets that are of interest for the caucus, the Women's Caucus. But before we proceed, I just want to remind to our panelists that each of you will have 10 minutes in total for your interventions, and I will let each of you know when there are 2 minutes by using the mic. So please don't be afraid when I come into live saying just 2 minutes, please, because we need to, since this is a really interesting discussions, many people want to have a conversation with you. So we need to allocate sufficient time for the Q&A session that is going to be there after you all share your presentations. And having said that, please let me give the floor first to Karina Vargas, representative of the ICCA consortium, and because she's going to share with all of us their collective views on how to gender responsibly monitor the target 3 of the GBF. But before we begin, please note that Ms. Vargas will speak in Spanish, so we encourage you all to use the interpretation feature for a seamless translation. Ms. Vargas, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hola, buenos días a todas y todos. Espero me estén escuchando bien ahora, que no haya ningún problema con el audio. Bueno, yo estoy aquí a nombre del consorcio PICA, y para quienes no conozcan al consorcio, el consorcio es una organización global que viene apoyando a pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales que vienen conservando sus tierras, aguas y territorios a través de sus propias formas de gestión y gobernanza. Como consorcio, nosotros contamos con una política de género y son puntos focales de género para las diferentes regiones. En este caso, yo estoy en este rol por la región de América Latina, y desde ahí es donde voy a dar un poco mis inputs, aunque con algunos ejemplos generales. Voy a abordar brevemente un par de aspectos generales para luego entrar a las preguntas puntuales que se nos hacen. Y un primer punto es hablar sobre cómo estamos abordando el enfoque de género desde el consorcio. Porque para nosotros es crucial entender que las relaciones de género son transversales a todas las dinámicas que se dan en los territorios, ¿no? Incluyendo el medio ambiente y también el acceso y control de los bienes comunes. Y es por eso que desde el consorcio, a través de esta política, nosotros buscamos confrontar las barreras y las inequidades estructurales que puedan estarse generando entre los géneros, y buscando relevar a la vez las contribuciones y los aportes de todos los géneros. Nosotros hablamos de todos los géneros porque vamos más allá del género masculino y femenino teniendo en cuenta que muchas de las culturas de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales con las que trabajamos entienden a los roles de género y al género como diversos, ¿no? Y en cada territorio existen diferentes conocimientos y prácticas que están relacionados tanto o específicamente para mujeres, para hombres u otros géneros, ¿no? Entonces, haciendo esta salvedad de que para nosotros el cómo abordar el género es nuestro punto de partida para un monitoreo efectivo y pertinente para la implementación del marco global de biodiversidad, ¿no? Desde una perspectiva de género que parta desde las cosmovisiones y miradas de los mismos pueblos y comunidades, ¿no? Otro punto que quisiera resaltar es que el consorcio reconoce el importante rol que cumplen las mujeres indígenas y de comunidades locales en sus territorios, asegurando, por ejemplo, la seguridad y la soberanía alimentaria de sus familias y sus comunidades, en la generación y transmisión de los conocimientos tradicionales sobre la conservación de la biodiversidad, o sobre el uso sostenible de los bienes comunes, y también relevamos el inmenso trabajo que realizan las mujeres para conservar la naturaleza, gestionar estos bienes comunes de manera sostenible, y en mantener este conocimiento tradicional, ¿no? Aportando también a la gobernanza de sus territorios, de sus espacios costeros, de sus comunidades, ¿no? Pero pese a ello, la realidad nos dice que están siendo excluidas de participar tanto en el diseño de políticas públicas respecto a estos temas, como en general de la gobernanza de estos espacios en sus comunidades, ¿no? Y por eso es importante asegurar esta gobernanza efectiva que garantice su participación, gestión y toma de decisiones en estos espacios, ¿no? Y ya viendo un poco a las preguntas que nos plantean respecto a cuáles son las brechas críticas en relación a los indicadores de la meta 3, que está vinculada a la meta 30x30, partiendo desde un enfoque basado en derechos humanos, tenemos por un lado el mismo diseño de los indicadores, como ya venían señalando, ¿no? El mismo diseño de los indicadores que limita en cierta manera un abordaje desde un enfoque de derechos y también desde un enfoque de género, ¿no? Porque principalmente son cuantitativos, como decía, ¿no? Y vinculados específicamente en la meta 3 a las áreas del porcentaje que se busca proteger, ¿no? Y solo encontramos uno o dos indicadores binarios, como yo les dije, o cualitativos, sobre la eficacia de gestión en estas áreas. Pero con esta falta de indicadores binarios, o con más indicadores binarios que se podrían trabajar, podríamos profundizar en preguntas sobre los derechos de quienes conservan y gestionan estas áreas. En el caso de nuestra organización, en los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales, y desde luego las mujeres que forman parte de estos grupos, ¿no? Por otro lado, la meta 30x30 conlleva un riesgo, ¿no? Y este podría dar lugar a un nuevo proceso de acaparamiento de tierras y territorios a nombre de la conservación, buscando alcanzar ese porcentaje al que se quiere llegar, ¿no? Esto porque el 80% de la biodiversidad del planeta se encuentra en territorios de pueblos indígenas, y la mejor manera de conservar los ecosistemas, yo creo que es asegurando los derechos de estos pueblos, entre ellos los derechos de las mujeres, para garantizar sus formas de vida, y asegurar los derechos de quienes dependen de estos ecosistemas, ¿no? Tenemos, por ejemplo, el caso de África, donde la mayoría de los territorios de comunidades fueron y siguen siendo despojados para convertirse en áreas protegidas, ¿no? Entonces, una laguna crítica en este sentido es la falta de mención de la protección de los pueblos indígenas y sus territorios tradicionales, y también los territorios de las comunidades locales, como un indicador en el marco global de conservación. Por ello, un indicador en relación a la seguridad jurídica de las tierras y territorios de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales como custodios de la biodiversidad es necesario, ¿no? Y esto para no generar mayores impactos a sus formas de vida, o también para no vulnerar sus derechos. Faltan también indicadores en la meta 3 respecto a las contribuciones que realizan las mujeres y cómo ayudan a conservar estos espacios, ¿no? O también indicadores sobre la participación de las mujeres en la gestión y gobernanza de estos espacios. Finalmente, en esta pregunta, señalar que faltan estos datos nacionales desagregados por género, por etnicidad y otros temas, que ya se mencionaba, ¿no? Los datos nacionales no existen mucho y esto no permite monitorear la implementación en los avances de este marco global. Y por otro lado también faltan guías, me parece, para aterrizar estos indicadores a los diversos contextos y amenazas que vienen enfrentando los territorios en los diferentes países, ¿no? Hablamos de territorios en tensión y creo que este contexto, que muchas veces es sumamente crítico, tiene que hacerse visible al momento de aterrizar estos indicadores. Respecto a la pregunta de cuáles son las posibles desagregaciones temáticas que podrían mejorar el monitoreo de la meta 3, creo que un tema central es incluir como un tema específico los territorios conservados y gestionados por pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, ¿no? Asegurando o incluyendo en este tema también la elaboración o la obligación de elaborar informes acerca del porcentaje de territorios que son conservados por pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, incluyendo también el seguimiento al reconocimiento y protección legal de dichas áreas y de los mecanismos de gobernanza que vienen siendo empleados por estos pueblos y comunidades para conservarlos, ¿no? El reconocimiento y la protección de los territorios conservados y gestionados por pueblos indígenas incluso podría ayudar a alcanzar el porcentaje que ya se estableció en la meta 3, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en Chile, con solo reconocer los espacios costeros y marinos de pueblos originarios ya se estaría alcanzando esa meta. Hablo de estos espacios costeros marinos porque son una figura como muy específica, o sea, para Chile, y esta figura otorga concesiones en el mar para los pueblos indígenas y para que ejerzan sus usos tradicionales, ¿no? En la práctica, estos territorios son territorios conservados por pueblos originarios desde tiempos inmemoriales. Entonces, también incluir estas cifras en estos territorios sería un gran avance, ¿no? El reconocer las áreas gestionadas y conservadas por pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales no solo ayudaría a alcanzar la meta, sino también, y sobre todo, asegurar los derechos fundamentales de los pueblos indígenas en estos espacios, ¿no? Como su derecho al territorio, como su derecho a la gestión de los bienes comunes, y desde luego también los derechos de las personas, ¿no? Finalmente, en este punto, se debe respetar la integralidad de las áreas protegidas y los territorios de vida, más allá de un porcentaje. Y esto lo menciono porque se habla de asegurar un 30% de áreas protegidas, pero también se vienen escuchando voces respecto a que el 70% restante de áreas ricas en biodiversidad y cruciales para los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales sí pueden explotarse, ¿no? Y esto va en contra de la integralidad de los territorios y de los ecosistemas, por lo que la garantía de los derechos territoriales en el monitoreo de la meta global de biodiversidad se vuelve fundamental, ¿no? Y ya finalmente, en menos de un minuto, respecto a cómo se puede reflejar la perspectiva de género en los indicadores de esta meta, señalar que creo que es importante identificar y visibilizar las contribuciones específicas de cada género, ¿no? Las contribuciones a la conservación de áreas protegidas, es decir, lo que aportan las mujeres, los hombres u otros géneros que se encuentren presentes en las comunidades o pueblos indígenas y que estén aportando a la conservación. Por otro lado, y no menos importante, es el tema de los recursos y el financiamiento para la biodiversidad que vendrán a ayudar a la implementación de esta meta, ¿no? Y es importante que estos recursos que vengan y la distribución de esos fondos se gestionen también desde un enfoque de género, ¿no? Considerando las brechas y las desigualdades que afrontan las mujeres para acceder a recursos, ¿no? Y buscando con estos fondos no solo aportar a alcanzar ese porcentaje establecido, sino también a mejorar la gestión y gobernanza de esos espacios con la participación activa de las mujeres. Esto por mi parte, he intentado ser breve y concisa, así que muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Ms. Vargas, for this intervention. I think that you have shared like a lot of details that are going to be useful for the ATIC itself, but also to all of us as delegates or observers to the next SOPSTA. And you raised really good points on like the disaggregation by sex, but also different topics that should be included as not there yet, or maybe not fully, as the participatory governance, gender responsive funding, and many others. But I'm gonna leave the discussions for a bit later with all the other colleagues. And now I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Juana Vera Delgado and Valentina Figuera, both colleagues from the Global Forest Coalition, that are going to discuss now and share with us their views on how to gender responsibly monitor Target 18 and Target 19. Thank you so much and welcome both of you. We cannot hear you, Juana.
Thanks very much, Karina, for the great presentation. And also thanks, Amelia, for giving us this opportunity. And precisely, we will try to answer the concern of Karina about this resource mobilization to implement not only Target 3, but also the different targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So I will share my screen and hope you can see now my screen.
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah. Yes, before presenting, I would like to outline our presentation. The first part of our presentation basically will try to contextualize the actual situation of the resource mobilization, especially harmful subsidies. And then after that one, we will, let's say, watch out. This is the situation, this is the context. So please take into account this reality for proposing these indicators for the gender responsive indicators. So the first part I will present, and the second part of indicators will present my colleague Valentina. So going to the next point of my presentation. Sorry. So here I would like to start with the Target 18 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which basically talk about the subsidies, about the harmful subsidies for biodiversity. So basically by 2025, or within 2 years, we should eliminate and phase out of reform incentives, including subsidies harmful for biodiversity. So, and even they are proposing to reduce at least in $5 billion United States dollar per 2030 all these harmful subsidies. And why we are also presenting here the Global Biodiversity Framework for Target 19, because both indicators are linked. These resource mobilizations and the elimination of harmful subsidies. So the resource mobilization basically is saying that substantially and progressively increase the level of financial resources from all resources, international, domestic, public, etc., and private. And at least they are planning to mobilize $2 billion US dollars per year by 2023. And even they are giving some tips how to mobilize those resources. For instance, they are seeing here increasing total biodiversity related international finance and significantly increasing domestic resources and leveraging private finance, promoting blended finance, implementing strategies for raising new additional resources, and stimulating innovative schemes such as payment for ecosystem service, offsets and credits, optimizing co-benefits and synergies of financing targeting, and enhancing the role of collective action, and also enhancing effectiveness, efficiency, and transparency. So it's at a simple view, it looks like, oh, this is really interesting. But watch out, we should take care here. For instance, in this tips D, they are saying stimulating innovative schemes such as payment for ecosystem service, green bonds, biodiversity offsets and credits, etc. Those are basically market-based approach. Those are not right-based approach. And all these schemes, so-called innovative schemes, it really has a negative impact on indigenous people territories, what already Karina was mentioning somehow, and especially on women and elders, children. So I will present a bit this issue later. So then what are the global needs for this mobilizing these resources actually? What is the situation actually? Well, they are saying actually let's mobilize 100 to 200 billion dollars per year for conserving biodiversity. But the issue is that for 2030, we need at least the basic needs is like 5 times more, like 680 billion years to fund this biodiversity conservation. And for 2050, even is reaching the trillion dollars. So this is the big gap. And the components of these estimated needs are basically protected area, state, and sustainable production like agriculture, forestry, fisheries, urban conservation, combating invasive species, and coral reefs and coastal zones. But they don't even indicate that within this biodiversity conservation fund, it is not included the implementation and following up of these targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and nor the target 22-23, of course. So it's not really included. Those are the component estimated areas of these global needs. So from where, as I already mentioned, here are the estimations, public, domestic, payment for environmental service, offset credits, etc. So this is more or less the estimation from where they will mobilize resources. But what is the ironic reality? The ironic reality is that we are trying to give one step forward, but in the reality, we are giving 5 steps behind. So I tried, for instance, to put in this graphic that the biodiversity conservation funding is like this 22%, but in the practice, these direct subsidies, the harmful subsidies, actually, it costs is the 78% of this total budget. So it means we are just like giving 1 step forward and 5 behind. And if we calculate the harmful subsidies, taking into account the environmental externalities, it reach further, like 4 to 5 billion trillions of dollars per year. So this is the reality. Only agriculture stands for more than 5 billions a year already dollars per year. It's causing this harmful, impacting negatively on biodiversity. So if we calculate these externalities and this external cost, it reached already the trillion, 1.8 trillion. You see, when taking into account these fossil fuels that agriculture use, for instance, to transport all these agricultural products, to freshen these products, etc., etc. So while the G20 countries agreed in 29 and 20 to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, they have made limited progress. Until now, we know now that one. Everybody of us know. So that we need to take into account. And for instance, I put an example here that in the name of equity.
Sorry, Juana, there are just 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I will try to finish in 3 minutes. In the name of equity and green sustainability development, for instance, only in 2023, the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change, this is a United Nations Convention, funded the largest, approved a funding proposal by the Green Fund to more than 100 million for monoculture plantation of oil palm, cocoa, rubber, and for sustainable industrial cattle farming. So the green portfolio includes agribusiness, such as multinational food processing, company morphing from Brazil, etc., etc. So this is in the name of equity and green sustainability. So also the Green Climate Fund has historically approved and funded other high controversial projects, such as this 25 million equity agreement with Arbaro Fund, a Germany-based private equity investment firm for monoculture tree plantations with devastating effects in the South, especially in indigenous peoples' territories and communities. You can see all these issues if you want more information in the Global Forest Coalition publications. So what are the main lessons for monitoring our framework? First of all, that the biodiversity finance remains niche and poorly tracked. And we are fighting an unfair battle because while trillions of US dollars is going into harmful subsidies, in the name of equity and this is the greenwashing, what we say, while the generated impact is totally invisible. And in part because it is deeply rooted in the colonial, extractive, and patriarchal system. So most of these indirect harmful subsidies and their differential impacts are not informed by the biodiversity considerations and not even in the MBSAPs. So when we are monitoring the financial flow of this, of our global biodiversity framework, it's key to make visible and denounce these harmful subsidies and greenwashing intentions. So I will leave now to my colleague, Valentina, to present the next slide.
Yes, thank you, Juan. I see we have we run out of time, so I will be, I'll try to wrap up in 1 minute. Basically, this segment dialogues with what Karina was presented. We have a proposal and we collected these complementary indicators according to the GBF of target 18 and 19. And we are precisely proposing that the amounts of subsidies should be eliminated for monoculture plantations, for those who actually are responsible for the global amount of percentage of biodiversity and forest loss. Next, please, just to wrap up. Next one. And the same with the target 19. So we collected this complementary indicator that you see in the top, and then in the orange lines, it's a proposal to basically, count the amount of women, indigenous people, and small producers who have secure access to financial resources, to land, and coming from different sources: international funding, domestic, public, and also engaging in conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems. So thank you, and I'm sorry that we run out of time, but I just really don't want to take more time on this. Thank you. I will share also some of our publications regarding this work, so you can check up and have more insights on this. I will check the links with you, share the links with you. Thank you, Amelia, and all the organizers.
Thank you so much, Juana and Valentina. And yes, just to address some of the queries that have been shared in the chat, like the presentations are going to be shared with the permission of the authors. because you have gathered like critical information, like these last two slides with the proposals that people would like to discuss more about them. So, and all the links, if you could share also in the chat, it's gonna be useful for the audience to know more about Global Forest Coalition's views on resource mobilization. And having said that, let us go now to hear from Mirna Fernandez, a representative of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, that she is going to share with all of us their reflections around Target 21 and how it could be gender responsibly monitored. Thank you so much, Mirna, and welcome to the stage. I can see that you're here, so could you?
Yes. Sorry, I lost connection for a second. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. I will share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen well and hear me well. Thank you so much. I will try to be brief, but please stop me or let me know when I have minutes. That's fine. Well, I will skip this a little bit because I think you know who we are. We are the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, the youth participation mechanism to the CBD. For the coming Montreal Biodiversity Framework, our three main policy priorities were intergenerational equity and full and effective participation of young people. Also transformative education, that is something that has come up in every consultation that we had in national and regional consultations, and also rights-based approaches for people and nature. Here we're talking about human rights, but also about nature rights, because we think that they are interlinked and interdependent. I'm now jumping straight on an analysis of Target 21. Actually, Target 21 is a very complex target because it has many elements that were all like, I don't know, a little bit forced into one target when we believe that we should have had different targets for many of the elements that are here. So I'm going to dissect a little bit the targets. The target talks about ensuring that the best available data, information, and knowledge are accessible to decision makers. Practitioners and public are the parts that are more important to us because we know decision makers will have this access anyway, but it's more the rights holders and the public who is usually not having this access. So it is participatory. Also to strengthen communication and awareness raising, they put education, monitoring, research, and knowledge management all together here. And the commits that traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices from indigenous peoples and local communities have to be accessed with the free, prior, and informed consent, which is a victory for this target because in the beginning it was mentioned at the beginning of target, and it was saying something like traditional knowledge should be accessible for decision makers, which didn't make much sense. So we're happy that at least it doesn't look like that. Some of the key elements that we have here, dissecting a little bit the targets. First is accessibility to information. And an element that I would like to highlight here is the Escazú Agreement, which is a similar agreement to the Regional Arauz Convention. The Escazú is for Latin America and the Caribbean. So here we have more development on how access to information should work at the national levels. So it develops on how the exercise of access to environmental information includes requesting and receiving information from competent authorities, and also being informed promptly when there is a request of information, and being informed of the right to challenge when information is not delivered, and also how parties should facilitate access for persons in vulnerable situations, and not only facilitate the access to information, but also provide the procedures to give assistance. For example, assistance on how to fill the forms, or how to request the information. So it is very detailed. So I think that these elements could be rescued in the implementation of this aspect of Target 21 that is related to the access to information. Another key element is traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices and technologies of IPLCs. Here, there is a very strong link with Article 8J, that is the article about these traditional knowledge, innovation practices from IPLCs. There is a whole working group and a lot of work that has been done already. So we think that having into account all the work that has been done by the article, by the working group on the Article 8J and the position of IPLCs on this will be key for the development of the indicators and implementation of these targets. Here, very important to also understand all the elements of the FP, free, prior, and informed consent, because many parties do not understand or take it for granted. Free, it means without giving, no, it's given voluntarily and without coercion, intimidation, or manipulation. Prior is sufficiently in advance, so 1 day or 2 days in advance before the project is implemented is not prior, and that happens in a lot of our countries and in a lot of projects. Informed, it means that they are actually having all the information in their local language and in a way that is understandable for them. Many times the consultations come in not even in the native language of indigenous peoples and local communities, and they consider it FP. And consent, because it is a collective decision-making process in the right holders that are affected. This means that it's not the head of the community, or no, it's not one of the leaders that has to sign, but it has to come from a consultative process that involves the whole community. And this is very important, taking gender into account, because many of the times these decisions are taken only by the men and not the women in the communities, who are the ones who are more eager to take decisions that will be more favorable for their children and the communities and the ecosystems that they depend on. Another key element here is communication and awareness raising. We don't have a target on communication and awareness raising as we did on the IG targets. So it might be important to look back at these IG targets and the indicators that they had, to see if there is something that can be rescued for the implementation of these targets. And on education, we don't have a target on education. This was one of the main priorities and the fights of the youth constituency. But we have a mention on education on the section C, on formal and informal education, that talks about the transformative education. That is innovative and is transdisciplinary. It doesn't tackle only formal but also informal education at all levels. And it also talks about lifelong learning and diverse worldviews and values and knowledge systems of indigenous peoples and local communities. So when we talk about improving education on this Target 21, it is important to highlight that we are referring to this education that is on the section C, not only citizenship education or not only environmental education as it is understood in the curriculums now. And finally, well, the component of management, research, and knowledge management will have to be very linked to the implementation of Target 20. That is about strengthening capacity building and development and access to technology and access to innovation and technical and scientific cooperation. So we will see how it goes, because for this target we don't have a headline indicator and we don't know how we are going to measure it. Well, and finally on indicators, the only headline indicator, well, we only have one headline indicator for this one, is an indicator on biodiversity information for monitoring the JBF. We don't know how we are going to measure the information. So all of these key elements that we saw and that are so important are not reflected here. And the proposed components indicators are the species status index and an indicator that comes from the SDG process. That is the extent to which global citizenship education and sustaining education for sustainable development, including gender equality and human rights, are mainstreamed. Then we have proposed complementary indicators. I'm not going to read all of them, but if you have a look, they are all related to species records, species or indexes related to species or assessments on threatened species, bioliteracy. So they are all related to biodiversity data and not really access on this data, but the availability of the data itself. So some things that are missing on the indicators, and where so that we cannot propose indicators right now because it is very difficult to formulate indicators for these targets without having the necessary support, the institutional support, and probably the scientific support. It's and especially with regards to having a gender responsive implementation is first. When it comes to women and girls traditional knowledge on biodiversity, how can we ensure that this is visible and it's not going to be hidden when we measure it? Is it going to be through gender disgregation data, for example, or data by gender, age, and indigenous status, or is there any other way in which we can reflect the traditional knowledge and also the role of women and girls in this intergenerational knowledge transfer? Because we're talking about education, we're talking about knowledge, and in the communities, the knowledge transfer is mainly carried by mothers, by women that will pass the knowledge to the next generation. So how are we going to measure that? It's very complicated. How the data gathering methods and analysis will be gender responsive, because again, if the data gathering is done in meetings when all the participants are the men in the communities, then we are not going to reach anywhere close to the reality. On education, we have an indicator from the SDGs on education, but it is not as nuanced as we would like it to be and to reflect the transformative education and the quality of the education that we need. But also it doesn't reflect how this education is going to be accessible for women and girls. On awareness, because we have this component of communication and awareness, how to ensure that all the materials that will come from this awareness and communication are going to be gender responsive as well. And finally, as I said before, the indicators that we have proposed until now are only on biodiversity data and on education, but all the other key elements of these targets are missing, and we need to have more proposals that are more reflective of these very key components that are all in these targets. I think this is it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mirna, for your presentation. I think that you highlight very critical points about the need of dissecting the targets. They are pretty complex targets, and being measured just with one element of it, it's not going to be possible. So there is a huge need of taking into account the different elements that build them, and also to link with other processes that you are mentioning. I'm going to invite the audience and the participants. If you have any question or comment, please share them in the chat so we can start addressing them, because I'm a bit afraid about the timing. The time is never enough. So while we listen to the other speakers, so kindly share your views and comments in the chat. And now, moving on to the next two presenters that we have, we're going to listen from Abigail Kidma from Teva, and she's going to give us her views and the reflections also coming from the IFB on the target 2022. And Abby, please, the floor is yours. I'm going to share your screen.
Thank you, Amelia. Yeah. Is it okay if you share from Canva, Amelia? Because yes, I added something, but if not, then it's yes. Okay. Great, thank you. I'll just share my video a bit. Sorry. We have a typhoon ongoing right now, so I'm coping up with my niece in her room. So apologies. I will turn off my video so my audio would become clear.
Don't worry, Abby, but we are actually seeing your video and not listening to you. So if you can switch them.
Okay, yeah. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes. Okay. All right, great. Thanks. So, hello everyone. It's nice to be here, and thank you very much to the Women's Caucus for inviting me to share also what we have been discussing within the IFB working group on indicators. I would like to say that I'm not an expert and I'm actually learning a lot as well from the other speakers, but I hope you can pick up something from this presentation and that we can discuss further on how we can, strategize together. Anyway, next slide, please. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. All right. So Target 22 has a lot of interesting elements, very important for, human rights and also as well as gender, apart from Target 23. So there's representation and participation of different rights holders, rights that are specific to IPLCs, rights of women, girls, children, youth, and persons with disabilities, access to justice and information, and the protection of environmental human rights defenders. So basically, these are procedural and substantive human rights that ultimately lead to what I think, the purpose of Target 22 really is, and it's about equity in actions in relation to biodiversity, equity in governance over territories and resources, equity in equitable participation, and etc. So, yeah, next slide, please. So in the current monitoring framework, yes, next slide, please. Oh, okay. Oh no, it has shifted. I'm sorry if the graphics were a bit moved, but basically in the monitoring framework, Julian mentioned earlier, there is a binary indicator, which is on number of countries recognizing the legal rights of different rights holder groups. And then there's a component indicator on land tenure. And then the rest are complementary indicators. Gender, there's also something again on land tenure, and then on human rights defenders. But what's missing actually is there are no indicators in relation to access to justice and information at the complementary level. And also what's very glaring is that there are no headline indicators for Target 22. And we perceive this as quite a gap because we have been asserting that Target 22 and 23 are actually cross-cutting across the framework. So this is quite, this is something that we have to be assertive. Next slide, please. All right. So the gaps and challenges, I've already mentioned some. There's no headline indicator for Target 22. The binary indicator on which is just a yes or no question in the national report, of course, will not be able to answer the nuances of how, different rights holder groups, IPLCs, women, youth, etc., are actually experiencing the actual implementation of, ensuring participation, ensuring rights are fulfilled, and etc. So there has to be more, just answering yes or no. Again, not all elements are covered in the current framework. There's no action. During the COP15 negotiations, they're really because there was a time crunch, really no time to delve deeper and have time to discuss, this the remaining targets in the framework, and to actually, headlines. So, for example, the one on land tenure, it was in the framework. It was a headline indicator beforehand, and there was no time to actually be operationalized, which was one of the questions of the parties who questioned its space in the headline indicator level. So next slide, please. So despite this, there are some opportunities that we can take advantage. For example, we already know there's an ATEG, and we have allies in the ATEG who are also for human rights based approach. So we have Mauricio and Georgie from FPP. We have Sefa from Gibbon. There are others, and I apologize, I forgot to take their names, but at least we have some people whom we can influence and support, so that we could have more rights-related indicators in the framework. And then there's also the online form on the monitoring framework, and this is where actually every one of us here could actually contribute our thoughts. And in the recent one, there's also actually a substantial contribution from the Women's Caucus on Target 23, which is quite important, and we should all be encouraged to engage in that forum, so that we could provide more balanced views on the indicators being discussed. And then the third, which actually Jillian already mentioned beforehand, was that they recognized the ATEG, the co-leads for the ATEG recognized that the binary indicators are, they don't really cover enough information. So for it to be meaningful, they ask the ATEG members to comment and give suggestions for questions that could be more relevant for the national report. So for example, the one on Target 22, they have sub-questions under it. So they made it more specific for rights holders. So is there a law for IPLCs on rights to land tenure and resources? Is there a law for women to access land tenure and to access resources and have ownership of land, etc.? So they are asking comments on this, and if you do have suggestions, it would be good to reach out to our allies. And then next slide, please. Okay. Oh, yeah. So for the IFP, the strategy from COP15 was to ensure that there are at least 2 headline indicators that are cross-cutting, one of which is the land tenure and the other one is on participation. So for the one on land tenure, it's an SDG one, and what's good is that it's also disaggregated by gender and type of tenure. So for indigenous peoples, then it's important to identify collective and individual land ownership. And there is a methodology for this already, and there's an institution that is working to adapt it to the Biodiversity Convention. I think it's the ILC, and we are working with it. What's lacking, however, is a good indicator on participation, a good metric. So I think where we can see the organizations are also working at this globally. Next slide, please. Okay, please. All right. Okay. Okay, maybe I can skip that. The challenges have been mentioned earlier. Okay, so other opportunities we can build on is the SDG framework does have some methodology for stakeholder participation, so that it might be good to review those and adapt it to the KMGPF. So there's one on water management, which is SDG 6, and one on urban planning. And then prior to COP15, there was a whole process of submitting possible indicators for the monitoring framework, but it was impossible to review them all. So maybe it would be good to go back and see which ones are the most feasible, and then look at other possible methodologies, such as Indigenous Navigator, for example, for Indigenous peoples, and reach out to institutions who have expertise on these indicators. And it's also good to note that there are some activities reported by countries on the Working Group 8J implementation in relation to the traditional knowledge indicators that may also be useful for this target specifically. Next slide, please. Okay, so, yes. Okay, so right now we don't have much concrete recommendations yet, but it's just good to reiterate that we should assert during the ATEG and SUBSTA discussions that the monitoring framework, the ATEG should not only discuss targets with headline indicators, but also address gaps of those without headline indicators. And that's actually probably more crucial. We should continue. There are different groups to have an exchange of discussions such as this on possible headline and cross-cutting indicators, and support our allies in the ATEG. And then third is to ensure disaggregation, especially gender and age disaggregation in relevant population-based indicators. So there's the land tenure ownership, and then there's also, the human rights defenders. Of course, there are also women and youth there. And there are also other indicators where this could be relevant. So yeah, that is all. Thank you. Apologies for the very poor internet connection, but I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby, and that despite the technological challenges, you're here with us. We are really grateful for the presentation that you prepared. And now let us move quickly to our next intervention that is going to be delivered by Tina Rinalini-Rai from Women for Biodiversity. And she will share with us about Target 23 and how it could be monitored. I want to remind just everyone that please, if you have any question or comment, please send it via the WhatsApp, the chat, so we can address them. And Tina, please come on floor, and you're very welcome.
Thanks, Amelia, and everybody. I don't seem I have much left to add because it was a very informative session with a lot of also some very key elements to look into. So my apologies, some of the reflections may be overlapping, but I think I'll do my best to skim through that quickly and just hopefully share some key work. Amelia, can you just let me know if you can see my presentation?
Yes, it's not yet in full screen. Yeah, now.
Okay. All right, great. So thank you everybody for joining in. This time I already did one session before this, going through the whole process of the monitoring framework. But on this one, I just wanted to also take less time, hopefully. Amelia definitely sent me a reminder but also trying to see, I want to hear also reflections from all of you as what could possibly be, because we really engaged a long time of looking at the gaps with the monitoring framework. But I think process ahead would be what instead or how to address those gaps that we have identified. So just looking at quickly, I think this was really very important to revisit was, of course, the monitoring framework is under decision 15.5. And as Gillian and colleagues from UNEP and others have also pointed out, one key element to also look at as a strategy would also be the decision 15.6.6, which is mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. This is also a very key element to really take into consideration with the monitoring framework, is because though you have the indicators, the way to be reporting on that, as the City Secretary has also informed, would also going to be through the national reporting. Again, this has again been already shared, but once again, so in the monitoring framework, like all the colleagues before me has also shared that of the 23 targets, there are some, not only 22 and 23, but maybe a total of 6 or 7 in a target that do not have headline indicators. Now, for the headline indicators, if you're going to go to this document, which looks at target 23, it's again that you have a component indicator, the complementary indicator, but again, the headline indicator has not been defined. Now, of course, it has also been shared that there is a binary indicator, and could we, or is it possible to use or advance the binary indicator to somehow encompass the elements, the complicated elements that are within the text of the target 23. Of course, according to the COP decision, both the headline and binary indicators are the core set of information that parties would need to report through their national reports. So the responses would then be aggregated in global reviews of process and implementation. So one of the discussion that is taking place, also briefly shared with, is that after the COP, to advance on the review of the headline indicators, the binary, the component, and complementary indicators, the ACTEC of about 43 experts have been selected to take this work forward to, of course, inform the substab, but also take it to COP16. Now, what is here proposed for a binary indicator is this one. Now, I think some of the problem happens when we look at the indicators framework sometimes, is that they don't have set relevance or where they came from. So sometimes it takes one, at least sometimes me, a longer time to review this. But just also looking at this particular binary indicator, and I also forgot to put it in, on where the legal framework, including customary law, guarantees women's equal rights to land ownership and or control. This is target SDG indicator 15A.1. Now the thing is that of course, like what Gillian talked about, that the guardianship of this indicator is within the FAO. They monitor this indicator. They have been reporting. There is a metadata on it, but of course, there is some gaps within that, including that it also addresses more majoritively on agricultural land. However, now the discussion around it is how far do we develop it, or one of the challenge of the discussion around the monitoring framework also has been that how far would the ACTAG or the process to develop some of the indicators that may be under the SDGs, because the SDGs were adopted under the UN General Assembly, and there is a mechanism, there is a methodology already developed. So that is one key element for us also to think, is if there are some of these indicators that we may be looking at, is how could we really look into addressing some of these elements that have already a methodology or if there is an add-on, how it would be done or what could be taken in place. Now, one of the component indicator, if you're looking at, is the gender plan of action. Now, the gender plan of action is also a very key document, key, of course, the outcome from the COP50, but also could play as an important indicator to kind of advance and contribute to not only target 23, because it has a lot of different things that may also be applicable for all the other targets. Now, one, as we have talked about, is one key element for me that I see is that though it's good to take the gender plan of action, it has about 30 addictive actions. Now, there are no indicators to define them. There are deliverables, there are outcomes, and there are no methodologies to really assess this, and also considering that the gender plan of action is voluntary and not mandatory. So it's a guidance note. So how do we really take some of those elements and take it? But one of the, I would really want to put this in the group, because I really would also like to hear from all of you, is currently this is empty. Now we really need to make sure is that how do we really fill it up, and what would be really very relevant to be used, because these headline indicators would be a very crucial element. Like I think also Abby talked about, we can't just leave it empty and say that we will only do by doing yes and no and use a binary indicator in the binary indicator and not necessarily, I don't know, have a headline indicator. Okay, so now looking at the AgTag and looking at this binary indicator, which has now the SDG indicator that we had proposed has been put in the binary indicator. Now the AgTag is working around it, and in the second meeting, first it was not in the work plan of the AgTag to look at any of the targets, and these were the targets that do not have a headline indicator. And the work plan initially started off by saying that they will not touch upon the binary indicators. But if you are going to look at the AgTag meeting, you will see that there is now a discussion, and this is from the AgTag second meeting, when they are also now discussing more on the binary indicators. And I think some of you also shared on this work, and I put a screenshot, which will be very relevant if anybody interested to follow this, is to look at the questions that have been targeted for the binary indicators to address. And this is what the AgTag would be looking at. I just wanted to now go back to the other decision on the national reporting. Why I said it's really very important, and I do see that because there is this discussion saying that, you know, the binary indicators could possibly be a way forward of adding those elements, of asking the parties to report it in their NBSAP reports. However, what then really needs to happen is that in this reporting template, this needs to be integrated into the reporting template, which is missing. So last year, there was a discussion around of some of these peer reviews of these templates on the NBSAPs, the 7th and the 8th reporting template, and the modus operandi of the open-ended forum of SBI for country review. So this is where we could really house into that. If the monitoring framework is there standalone, we also really need to see is how would those indicators also influence or also guide the other reporting mechanisms, either as a headline or a binary indicator, to really take out the actual actions or policies or action that have been put into place to address the full implementation of Target 23. Now, I'm just going to close with this, and I've kept it really short, sorry, is that so headline indicators right now is empty for targets 22 and 23. But the discussion around is that what what should the headline indicator then for target 23 should look like? How would it be developed? Who? There's always a guardianship because it takes a while to develop these indicators. You also need financing support, funding support to get this work done. And by when? By when do we really see that? Because the way that we see that is that it's really very important to have a headline indicator identified right now before the parties all finalize their NBSAPs. Because that is a very key document, and if the strategies go missing without really addressing how they're going to put actions and what will be an indicator to assess their progress towards target 23 is going to be really very difficult going forward. I don't know, review the NBSAPs again, or looking at policies or national policy that may have an impact because of this. Now, one of the key elements that we have been doing is, I think like what Avi talked about, is that
Sorry, Tina, if you just allow me to make an announcement that the session will continue, but we are going to continue without interpretation. So I'm sorry for the ones that were listening to the Spanish or the French interpretation. We need to, the interpretation will stop, but we will continue just to listen to Tina's conclusions and then to having some closing remarks from the Substa chair, Mr. Ezequiel Diaz, to come to an end of the session. And also, if you have any comment or question, please, everyone, I think it would be beneficial if you type it in the chat so we can address them a bit later or by mail, because this is a critical discussion. Sorry for this, Tina, and please continue.
Yeah, no, that's okay. This is the last slide. So I think this is a very crucial element of, we are talking about the gaps. Now, I think we really need to also address, because this is going to be discussed in the 45th session, which is going to be in October in Nairobi. So what do we really take there? Is there a process? So we are in the process of reviewing all the past peer reviews since 2020. Like Ave said, there could be possibly those indicators that are already in the list. Now, the challenge has been that to contribute to the indicators process, what my understanding is that you really don't have time to put in any new indicators there. So what we are doing is we are basically going through our archives and trying to see with all the submissions that we have done, if we could use that in different spaces that we have done to see whether there could possibly be something to kind of get this going. The other one is Coalition of Allies to discuss in strategic and support development. And this is one group we've been working with, of course, with the Human Rights Working Group. There is a subgroup on indicators. We are working with them, but we are also working with some of our other allies, with UN agencies and data statisticians to try to also do that. So if there is an interest from any one of you, please reach out if you would like to join in, or you have the expertise to help, because the more people looking into this analysis, much better. So I'll be happy to get any questions if there is, but apologies for rushing this. Some of them were already repeated. Again, once again, what we already talked about, please take a look at it. This is a very, very important portal. I'm happy to see that since 1 month, the submissions for indicators 1423 has gone from 2 to 10. There's also on the cross-cutting agenda, it was 2 to 13. But this is the forum that is also looking at contributions. So I keep saying the more submissions, the better. So please, it's an open forum, and this is what's also going to be guiding the ACTEG to inform the discussions on headline indicators and binary indicators, and giving the review in October prior to Substa in Montreal, and then also in Substa in Nairobi. So with that, thank you so very much, Amelia and everybody, and handing it back to you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Tina. I think that you mentioned also some critical points that we need to address, and also many critical opportunities for everyone to participate. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Ezequiel Diaz, the Substa chair, to the CBD to provide some closing remarks to this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and congratulations to the whole group and organizers for this webinar. I've been listening with interest the different presentations. I believe that the more we can provide information to measure participation of women and in particular different stakeholders, key stakeholders for the implementation of the framework is key. In particular, how effectively are participated in decision-making on the different activities. I saw presentations mentioning incentives. So there is a path to see this transformation, but what amount of the transformation of these incentives is really going to the right places, and in what amount women are participating in this to happen. I would like to mention some ideas for you to consider while providing feedback to the ATEC and deliberations in SUBSTA. For example, how many women participate in projects for the implementation, or how many are leaders of the different projects? How many are participating at protected areas departments? How many posts, what percentage of posts are on protected areas, for example, or the different productive activities? We talk a lot about mainstreaming, but we need to see also, we need numbers and more information from productive activities that depend and affect biodiversity in order to make mainstreaming appropriate. So I believe there is an important source of information that you can also extract from there. How many ministers of environment we have at national level, also national level, that are women? That would be a quite interesting figure, because I believe this also count at national and also subnational levels. And very clearly what Abby Kidman mentioned on indicators on participation, how to turn this into numbers. What is the evidence? How can we inspire to countries to put more numbers on this and to see the proportion, and if we are moving into the right track and balance. Of course, there's a challenge that we don't have any headline indicators for gender. We have some suggestions, well, but the binaries, but how to transit from a binary to a real headline indicators, I believe is a process. It's not only the number of countries that have some legal dispositions or elements. I think we need to go more, but do not disregard the relevance of component and complementary indicators. There is some language there, but I believe that can be also enriched with precision according to local circumstances. I invite you to be inventive and proactive, to look for ways to show this information as part of the process. And what is very important, as also Nelly mentioned, is what is the data source that are clear enough, and also to take into account that there's also the group of AJ will be providing some elements, and also the financing group will be providing so. And I'm happy to see that some of you are part of the ATEC and are also providing information at the forum. I believe all those elements, we will see more information in the Montreal meeting and also during the SUBSTA in October as a first step. And then in SUBSTA 26 in May, we will have more elements to have a more complete monitoring framework. And thank you so much and congratulations. I hope these ideas can help to be more precise in your contributions. Thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Sergio, also for your support all along these months or years of negotiations. We will make sure of taking notes of your ideas. And before we close the session, please, I invite everyone to open your cameras so we can take a good picture. And also, if anyone has a comment or a question, kindly raise your hand. Put silence the microphone, please. And Claire, you can tell us when you are done with the pictures, please.
Camerango. Everyone
smile.
Amelia, I have a difficulty to open my camera. It's Dorothy from DRC. Dorothy Senga from DRC.
Hi, Dorothy. Please open your camera if you can. If not, we will add your face as an edition.
I have a difficulty, such difficulty to open it.
Okay, don't worry.
Let me check, please.
Yes, if you can do it, that's great.
Oh my God. What's matter? Oh, sorry.
Don't worry.
It's not. Oh yes. Here we go.
Yes, we can look at you. Claire, you tell us.
Thank you so much.
Everyone is holding the smile. And I'm sure we're gonna call for a second round of this session because there's a lot of discussion that we need to have. We will look at this session as just the introduction to the topic. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for your interest, for the time that you dedicated to the session, also to our speakers, and to their interpreters that were also supporting us. Claire, you tell me, are we done? Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Let's be in touch with the email.
Bye.
Let's be in touch. Hi, Samantha, Salimata. How are you?
Fine.
Tumina,
Hi,
could you
everyone.
close the
Dorothy
session?
from